In the age of social media, they call it aura farming, borrowing luck from the charismatic. During the River Dragon Festival, one boy became more than charismatic. He became a phenomenon. And the aura he cultivated attracted something far older and far hungrier than any of his online followers. The drumbeat was a physical force, a series of dull blows to the chest that vibrated up through the soles of Marcus's worn leather shoes. From his position on the packed dirt riverbank, the River Dragon Festival was a sensory assault. The air, thick with the smell of grilled pork, river mud, and human sweat, was split by the roar of the crowd, a single multi-throated beast of a sound. Marcus, a man who dealt in quiet facts and cold evidence, hated the noise. He was a detective. Chaos was something he contained, not participated in. But he was here for his son.
His gaze drifted to the Red Serpent's boat, a vessel whose peeling paint told a story of decades without a victory. The crew, old fishermen with backs as bent as their oars, spoke in low, resigned tones. Marcus, blending into the crowd, caught snippets of their conversation. Our last year, just for pride then. Can't afford a new boat anyway. They were the sentimental favorites, the team everyone cheered for out of pity. Today they had pooled what little money they had for one last gamble. A boy. His son's name was Kai, but as the boy leaped onto the prow of the boat, even that name felt inadequate. In that moment, he became an idea, a spectacle. He was the River Rider. The boy didn't just stand on the prow, he possessed it. He wasn't performing for the crowd, he was performing for the river itself, a silent, demanding audience. Each stomp of his bare foot sent a visible shiver down the boat's wooden spine. This wasn't practice. This was invocation. The race began. The Serpent's boat surged forward, but it was the boat of their rivals, the reigning champions, that drew Marcus's professional gaze. Mid-stroke, a sharp crack echoed over the water, distinct from the drums. A lead paddler on the champion team cried out, holding up the two splintered halves of his oar. It had snapped clean in two. The detective in him couldn't help but register the anomaly, making a sharp mental note of it. Coincidence? His logical mind insisted, but his gut told a different story.
It was all the opening they needed. The Red Serpents didn't just move, they flew. They slid through the water as if on a sheet of glass, while others fought a thick, resistant current. When they crossed the finish line an impossible 10 lengths ahead, the roar of the crowd changed from a cheer to a sound of disbelief, of awe, the sound of a legend being born.
Later, away from the roaring crowd, the captain of the Red Serpents approached Marcus. The old man's eyes were wet with tears. For 30 years, we haven't won," he stammered, pressing a thick, lumpy envelope into Marcus's hand. "Your boy, he's a miracle." Marcus felt the wad of cash, heavy and foreign. It was more than he made in a month. It felt wrong, like payment for a crime he couldn't name. He tried to refuse, but the old man insisted, bowing deeply before disappearing back into the celebration. Marcus stood there, the envelope feeling like a lead weight in his hand.
That night, the first videos appeared. Shaky, raw footage from the crowd. It got a few thousand views, a local curiosity. Marcus watched it, a knot of pride and unease in his stomach. He went to bed, thinking that was the end of it. He was wrong. He was woken after midnight by a sound that would become the soundtrack to his nightmares, the incessant high-pitched buzz of his phone receiving notifications. It wasn't just buzzing, it was vibrating itself across his nightstand. Someone had taken the raw footage. A creator had edited it, synced Kai's otherworldly movements to a haunting, bass-heavy electronic track that was trending. They added slow motion at the peak of his leaps, speed ramps as the boat surged forward. They had turned his son into an aesthetic, a vibe, a living legend in under 60 seconds. This was the video that was going supernova. Marcus scrolled through the comments, a river of digital fire and worship. But then he saw it, a small thread. Did anyone else see that at 0:45? Weird glitch. It wasn't a glitch, a third comment read, the one that made Marcus's blood run cold. I downloaded it. I went frame by frame. Look at his shadow on the water. His heart hammering, Marcus replayed the video. He paused, his fingers shaking at exactly 45 seconds. For a single nightmarish frame, the image distorted. The boy's silhouette remained human, but his shadow on the murky water was alien. It was a spider-like thing with 4 long, grasping arms, a monster wearing his son's shape. By day 2, Kai was no longer just a boy. He was a phenomenon, surrounded by team captains and budding sponsors. Between races, as he sat panting under the harsh sun, a teammate offered him water and flinched, pulling his hand back. "Geez, Kai," he stammered, "you're like an ice block. In this heat?" Marcus, standing nearby, overheard. He walked over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The boy's skin was unnaturally cold, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with sweat or exhaustion. It was the cold of a deep cellar, of a place the sun never touched. The chill was a premonition. In his last race of the day, Kai stumbled, nearly falling. That night, after Kai was in bed, Marcus sat with his laptop and headphones, determined to find a rational explanation for it all. He analyzed high-quality footage of the day's races, isolating the audio. Beneath the roar of the crowd and the pounding drums, he heard something else, a faint, sibilant whisper woven into the fabric of the sound. It was a name spoken by what sounded like 1,000 voices at once, over and over again, a name he didn't recognize, a name that wasn't Kai's. He ripped the headphones off, just as a thin, strangled whimper came from down the hall. He burst into Kai's room. His son was thrashing, his eyes open and locked on the ceiling. "Cold," he muttered, his voice raspy with fear. "So cold, the fingers in the water pulling." The same cold Marcus had felt, the same water that held the monstrous shadow, the same water whose name, perhaps, was being whispered on the wind. The third day arrived with a shroud of gray rain, washing the festival's vibrant colors into muted, depressing tones. The change was reflected in Kai. He was a ghost at the breakfast table, the vibrant life force seemingly drained out of him, leaving a pale shell that flinched at the sound of the kettle whistling. He pushed his food around his plate, his eyes vacant. "I'm not going," he whispered, and the relief that flooded Marcus was so immense it almost brought him to his knees. He spent the day letting his son sleep, the quiet of the house a welcome respite, but the image of the four-armed shadow was never far from his thoughts. Marcus finally drifted off in his armchair, the knot of anxiety in his chest loosening for the first time in days. He was woken hours later by a sound his detective's brain registered before he was even fully conscious. It was a soft,
metallic snick. A sound that didn't belong in the sleeping house. The sound of the front door latch. Cold dread washed over him, sharp and absolute. He moved through the house, a phantom in the dark. The boy's room was empty. The bed was made, the sheets disturbingly neat and cold. He ran. He ran towards the only place that made sense, the only place his son's world had consisted of for the past 3 days, the river. He found him on the main dock. Kai stood in his thin pajamas, rain plastering his hair to his skull. But he wasn't just standing there. His head was bowed, and he was whispering. Soft, sibilant sounds, a one-sided conversation with the black, swirling depths. Marcus's blood ran cold. He wasn't just sleepwalking. He was communing. Marcus managed to lead the boy back to the house. The moment they stepped inside, the strange trance broke, and Kai collapsed into a chair, shivering. I don't remember, he stammered, looking up at Marcus, his eyes wide with genuine bewilderment. Sleepwalking, Marcus said. The word was a lie, a flimsy shield. But what could he say? You were talking to the river? That night, after locking the door, sleep was an impossibility. The patterns were too strong, the anomalies too loud. This was no longer a series of coincidences. This was a case. Under the sterile, humming lights of the precinct's archive room, he started digging. He wasn't looking for ghosts. He was looking for connections, for methodology. He typed keywords into the cold case database. River Dragon Festival, child, unsolved, drowning, disappearance. The system whirred, and the ghosts of the past began to emerge. The 4th day, the final day of the festival, dawned bright and clear. In a terrifying reversal, Kai woke up beaming, full of a wiry, feverish energy. I feel great, he announced. It was just a bad dream. Marcus's protests were drowned out by the pleas of the team captain, who had paid a small fortune to book him for the finals. To the outside world, it was a triumphant return. The Wonder Kid had overcome his illness. To Marcus, whose mind was now filled with faded photographs of other children, it felt like watching a lamb, miraculously healed, trot willingly towards a slaughterhouse. The final race was the peak. The air was electric. As the boat shot forward, Kai began his masterpiece. He was a whirlwind of motion, a living vortex of energy on the prow. The roar of the crowd was absolute. Then, 1/3 of the way down the course, he froze. Mid-spin, his body locked into place, a statue of captured momentum. For 5 seconds that stretched into an eternity, there was only the sound of the oars. Then a paddler shouted his name. The sound seemed to break the spell. The boy's rigid body didn't relax, it simply tipped. He plunged sideways into the river, hitting the water with a sickening splash that was swallowed by the sudden, collective scream from the shore. At that exact moment, back in the dusty archive room, Marcus found it. Not one file, but 3. 10 years ago, 20, 30. Each was a chilling echo. The victims, all celebrated child dancers. The circumstances, sudden fame, followed by intense nightmares and sleepwalking. The outcome, each child found dead on the 3rd day of the festival. And the detail that made Marcus's blood run cold. On the arms and legs of each child were 4 small, perfectly formed handprints, like the marks of a child's grip, yet no earthly perpetrator could ever be found. The 4-armed shadow, a chill, completely separate from the station's air conditioning, crept over Marcus's skin.
The pattern wasn't identical. His son had survived the third day, but it was too close. It was a recurring, malevolent equation. In that instant, the logic that had defined his entire life shattered. As the panicked sirens began to wail from the direction of the river, he knew he had only one option left. He made the call he swore he would never make. His thumb hovered over the contact, a name that tasted like ash and regret. Elena, his estranged wife, the woman he'd left because he couldn't stand her superstitious nonsense. The amulets, the incense, the talk of spirits. He couldn't risk his son growing up in a world of irrational fear. Now, that irrational world was the only one that held any answers. She arrived with the speed of a storm front. Kai had been rescued, pulled sputtering from the water, and was now huddled in the living room. Elena took one look at him, her eyes that Marcus always thought saw too much, widening in terror. She ignored Marcus, kneeling before her son, her hands hovering over him.
"Oh, you foolish, brilliant boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. She looked up at Marcus, true fear in her eyes. "You didn't just get their attention. You became a feast." "Elena, what are you talking about?" Marcus demanded. "It's a 10-year cycle, Marcus. A creature from the river. An entity. It doesn't eat flesh. It eats emotion. Adoration, love, fame, or intense, widespread fear. It wakes every decade for the festival, looking for a vessel."
She explained that the other children were just appetizers, locally famous, their disappearances generating a spike of fear that the entity would feed on before vanishing. "But our son," she said, her voice cracking, "with the internet, he became a global phenomenon. The amount of pure adoration directed at him was more than it had ever seen. The creature is greedy, Marcus. It changed its plan. It let him live past the third day, letting the fame build. It wanted to do more than just feed. It wanted to take the source. It has two ways to get a full meal," Elena explained, her face pale. "It can harvest a massive burst of fear, or it can consume the soul of a single, intensely beloved person. It has chosen our son." Marcus felt the last of his rational world crumble to dust. "Then how do we fight it? How do we save him?" Elena looked at him, her expression grim. "We can't fight it. It's too old. The only way to save him is to make it let him go. We have to make everyone, and I mean everyone, hate him."
The plan was madness, a desperate gambit conceived in the quiet horror of their living room. It went against every logical bone in Marcus's body. To save his son, a boy he was sworn to protect, he had to orchestrate his public crucifixion. Elena, her voice low and urgent, laid out the strategy. The race organizers, eager for the views and publicity, had already scheduled a rematch for the final. They would use that. They would use the medium machine that had built their son up to tear him down.
They released a statement. "The River Rider will return." They fanned the flames, promising a legendary performance. The internet ignited. The hype was immediate and immense, a tidal wave of anticipation. The plan was simple. Draw the largest possible audience, concentrate the world's adoration onto their son, and then, at the peak of that energy, pull the plug. They would hide Kai, prevent him from showing up. The disappointment would curdle into rage. The love would become hate. And the entity, having bet everything on consuming a beloved soul, would starve. The most crucial part, Kai could not know. He would never agree to it. On the morning of the rematch, a cold, unnatural stillness fell over the house.
Marcus and Elena were about to tell Kai they were taking a trip out of town when they found him in his room, already dressed in his performance vest. A terrible, placid smile was on his face, his eyes shining with a light that wasn't his own. "It told me," he said, his voice a flat monotone. "It told me you were going to hide me. It won't let you." Before they could react, the front door slammed shut with a deafening boom that shook the house.
An unseen force, heavy and cold as a tombstone, pressed down on them. Marcus tried to move, to draw his weapon, but his limbs were locked, encased in invisible cement. Elena struggled, whispering frantic incantations that died in her throat. Frost spiderwebbed across the window panes. They were prisoners in their own home, forced to watch through the living room window as the nightmare unfolded.
A man, a villager, whose face seemed to shift and blur, approached the house and called Kai's name. And their son, the boy they were trying to save, walked out to meet him without a shred of hesitation, his movements smooth and unnervingly serene. Marcus and Elena could only watch, their silent screams trapped behind paralyzed lips.
The crowd was a beast, larger and louder than ever before. The energy was palpable, a thick broth of hero worship and frantic expectation. On the live stream, the comments flew by in an unreadable torrent. Every soul, both present and online, was focused on one single point: the boy on the prow of the lead boat. The starting drum boomed. The boat surged forward. Kai stood on the prow, a perfect silhouette against the bright sun. He raised his arms, and the crowd's roar climbed to an impossible new height. This was it, the final offering. The entity was about to receive its feast. Marcus and Elena, still trapped, felt the last of their hope drain away. But then the unthinkable happened. Just as he should have begun his dance, Kai sat down. He just sat. The fluid, godlike dancer became a stubborn, motionless lump on the front of the boat. A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. The drums faltered. Chants of dance, dance started to rise. The live stream comments shifted from emojis to question marks.
In response to their calls, Kai lifted a single, defiant hand. He extended one finger, a crude gesture of contempt known the world over, aiming it directly at the thousands of his adoring fans. The confusion on the shore and online instantly curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. The roar of adoration became a roar of outrage. Boos and curses filled the air. As if feeding on their hatred, Kai became a gremlin of chaos. He turned and started interfering with his own team, pushing at their oars, breaking their rhythm. The champion boat, the vessel of a god, floundered and fell hopelessly behind. He hadn't just refused to dance. He had spectacularly and intentionally thrown the race. Inside the house, the invisible pressure vanished. Marcus and Elena gasped, stumbling forward as their muscles unlocked. The cold presence that had filled the room was gone, starved in an instant. The tsunami of hatred had been a poison pill for the entity, which had chosen to feed only on love. It had been offered a feast and had died of famine. They burst out of the house and ran. The scene at the dock was an ugly riot. The crowd, cheated of their miracle, was throwing food, bottles, anything they could find at the boy. But Kai wasn't cowering.
He was just sitting there amidst the debris, his head held high. Marcus, shouting "Police!" pushed through the mob, wrapping his arms around his son, shielding him from the worst of the blows. Marcus called his unit, and soon the order of the law imposed itself on the chaos of the mob. They were escorted home through a gauntlet of hate-filled glares, the family a tight, defensive unit against the world. Back in the quiet of their home, the adrenaline faded, leaving only questions. "How did you know?" Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. Kai looked up from between his parents, his face streaked with dirt, but his eyes clear for the first time in days. "I was awake that night," he said softly, "when you and Mom were talking. I haven't heard you two talk like that in years, so I pretended to be asleep." He had heard the entire insane plan, and he had decided to take the fall himself. Marcus pulled his son and his wife into a tight embrace, the solid weight of them the only evidence he needed in the world. He had been so wrong about so many things. "I'm sorry, Elena," he whispered, and in that moment, the years of distance between them collapsed. Kai had lost his fame, his fortune, and the love of thousands. He was now an online villain, a local pariah. But as he sat there, wrapped in the arms of the two people who mattered, he knew he hadn't lost a thing. He had won back his family. And they all knew that online hate, for all its noise, is fleeting. It burns bright and fast, then turns to forgotten ash. But this, right here, was forever.